Hey everyone, I wanted to give you a 1 year update on this rocket mass heater in a tiny house in cold Montana. It's working. Reports are that it works very well. You start off at about 75 degrees and you can wake up in the morning with that still being above 60 when it's 0 degrees outside. I consider that a pretty good result, especially for a tiny house. Tiny houses can be problematic when you're trying to heat them with rocket heaters. Often you'll have tight space where you have to squeeze in the heater, which means getting uncomfortably close to wood. You have to be careful about that, and often the mass that you're trying to store the heat in is undersized, which means you wake up cold, unless you figure out some way to balance the mass with the heating requirements. And I think we've done a pretty good job here. The first thing that I would say is important is these heat shields that keep any of the high temperatures away from the wooden floor. We've got insulated brick holding the cob mass around the burn chamber up off the floor, with a radiant heat shield underneath to keep that wood from catching fire. We don't get above about 104 degrees there, even with full long-term firing. Being able to fire this for 8-10 hours at a time is really quite important in this cold environment. A lot of people make the mistake of expecting a rocket heater to be able to heat your house with a couple of hours total of feeding. It's not really reasonable to expect heat in a rocket heater to last more than 2 times as long as you've been firing it, and that's feeding it quite well and getting it quite hot. So if you want it to stay warm overnight, 8 hours, you really should be firing it for 4 to 6 hours, preferably 8 hours, before going to bed. So if there's one negative that rocket mass heaters have, it's that they really aren't for people who work long hours away from home and then come home and fall into bed, because you won't really have time to run it. I mean, it's really nice to be able to use cheap or free small diameter firewood to heat a building, but with a rocket heater you got to be able to stick around and feed it. So this one, we managed to get most of the heat that it produces into the mass to store the heat and have it slowly released. There's 2 places we store that heat. The first is in this box of sand around our burn chamber. This is our feed tube, and then the burn chamber goes down and over and up under here. The riser is up under this stainless steel barrel. A stainless steel barrel also radiates heat slower than a black steel barrel, so that helps keep more of the heat in the mass, less of it just radiating right into the room and overheating you. Sand allows heat to travel through it, so you can store some heat in sand, but sand is a lot slower transmitter of heat than cob or stone, which is really helpful for like the space where we're kind of close to wood. The heat shield makes a big difference. We've got a 1-inch gap behind this reflective sheet metal surface with an opening at the bottom, opening at the top, so any heat that doesn't get reflected back off of it goes into the air behind the heat shield, and that air rises because hot air tends to rise, sucking cool air in behind the heat shield to keep things cool back there. That way any heat that comes out the chimney or out of the radiant barrel doesn't catch the wood on fire or overheat the wood. If wood gets overheated repeatedly over long periods of time, the temperature at which it catches on fire can drop dramatically. So what was safe one day suddenly just isn't, and that's a problem. So having proper heat shields makes a big difference. The exhaust for this comes out of the cob and sand mass and into a bench made out of pea gravel and stone, local rock like this. It's quite dense, quite heavy, stores a lot of heat, and there's a bunch of that tucked in here between the two pipes. We got a pipe going that way, all the way almost to the wall over there. There's a clean out at the front of that bench. Let's see if we can give you a good view of it. Not particularly a good view, but there's a clean out over here, and it's all surrounded by pea gravel, which stores a little bit of heat and slowly releases it, but mostly insulates it. Insulates the mass away from the floor and away from the wall. You'll notice that we have gaps all the way along the sides and underneath the mass bench. So if anything starts to warm up, the vertical surfaces will tend to put heat into the air that causes that air to move up and suck cooler air in underneath the heater. We have yet to see it get above about 104 degrees under there. You can see the gap better over here. Personally, I don't like wooden boxes for putting these in. I'd much rather put it in a metal box. But it doesn't get hot enough to cause problems for the wood. Most of the heat gets stored directly in the center here, and this core made out of stone and cob, and there's pea gravel under and around between the wood and the stone and cob. The cob kind of sticks all the stone together structurally, but also thermally. So if you had airspace between stacked stones or pea gravel, then the heat tends to travel very slowly, and that's great for places you want insulated, like at the edge here where there's some wood, but it's not so good for if you've got big pieces of rock that you want to have retaining the heat from the exhaust pipes. So there's underneath this pea gravel, there's a core made out of cob and this rock. There's space under here, under this kind of benchy thing made out of bricks, and there's a gap under the bed to let any heat that rise up and disperse into the room rather than building up, excuse me, under the bed, which could cause a fire. I've actually seen people build cob benches that they set cushions on to make them more comfortable, but the cushion insulates the top of the bench, causes heat to build up, and you can move your pillow, your cushion, and expose that hot surface underneath to air, and have the bottom of the cushion catch on fire as soon as it is exposed to air, because the cob gets that hot. The pea gravel won't tend to get that hot. It tends to isolate the heat from the edges and slowly release it. So see, we have another gap back here so that any heat that does build up circulates into the room. The exhaust coming through here. Here's a clean out. We've got clean outs in a couple different places, in 3 different places back there as well, so that we can reach every inch of this pipe in case there's a buildup of ash anywhere in there that would clog things. There's going to not be any creosote to speak of, unless somebody uses really wet wood repeatedly, really green wood repeatedly. And just in case they do, we can reach every inch of this interior surface of the pipe, and that allows us to keep it clean, allows us to inspect. I do also like being able to reach in and feel for hot spots around anywhere around the bench, so that we don't catch the wood on fire. We've got a transition here. We used a 6-inch rocket so that we wouldn't overheat the space, but we used an 8-inch pipe as it goes through the bench because it's got roughly twice the surface area as a 6-inch pipe, and our vertical pipe goes to about 2 inches from the bottom surface of that flat surface of that T, so that the hotter gases tend to stay in the bench and get warmed into the heat mass, the stone and the cob, rather than just having the hottest gases escape up the chimney. We want to have just a tiny bit of heat going up the chimney to allow the exhaust to leave and to allow the exhaust to, as it's leaving, pull more fresh air into our feed tube to continue the fire. That fresh air is essential to keeping the fire going. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. I really do like having a year of use by other people to inform me as to how the rocket behaves in the most challenging of circumstances and in the hands of people who have less experience with them. Rocket heaters can be finicky, so the real test is to whether it works for somebody with little or no experience. Talk to you soon.